Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Eric Steckler, and I'd like to present the Forgotten Exodus, the end of Jewish life in Arab countries after 1948. Jews have lived in the Middle East and North Africa for over 2,000 years, much longer than the Arabs, and each region or country has had its own unique Jewish history and culture. Next. The number of Jews in Arab countries in 1948 was approximately 860,000. Here you see a draft law from 1947 of the Arab League, which is a blueprint of what was to come for Jews in their country. And this was before there were any Palestinian refugees. On November 29, 1947, Jews in Palestine celebrated the UN vote on the partition of Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. This led to a 5.5-month brutal civil war between the Jews and the Arabs of Palestine. This culminated in the Declaration of Independence by David Ben-Gurion on May 14, 1948. On that day, there was a headline in the New York Times which said, "Jews are in grave danger." This would prove to be prophetic. What I'd like to do now is go through the countries in the Middle East, roughly in chronological order, when the exodus of Jews from the Arab countries began, starting with with Yemen. Yemen had approximately 50,000 Jews. The vast majority lived in 1,200 highland villages in the mountains of Yemen, and only 10 to 15% lived in the Jewish quarters of the capital, Sana'a. The Jews had a dhimmi status, meaning second-class citizens, and they had worse disabilities than any other Arab country, especially where their leader, the Imam, held sway. Jews were involved in multiple crafts. Here you see women baking bread, a man repairing a mattress, a silversmith, and Jews making alcohol, distilling alcohol. In the remote tribal areas, Jews actually had a better relationship, a symbiotic relationship. They did essential work for protection. Here in the upper left, you see the British colony of Aden, a British possession since 1839, where approximately 8,000 Jews lived. On December the 2nd to the 4th, 1947, a few days after the UN partition vote, there was a riot by the Muslims which destroyed the Jewish school. 82 Jews were killed. Here in the center, you see Imam Ahmed bin Yahya, who took over from his father after his assassination in February 1948. He reversed the 1922 decision to prohibit immigration of Jews to Palestine in May of 1949. Why? It's unclear. It might have been religious reasons. He considered Jews going to Israel like the Muslim Hajj to Mecca. He also probably thought Jews were happy and many would not leave. The Jews had other ideas. Their place in the economy was deteriorating. There was anarchy in the land. There was increased tensions with Muslims. There was the role of Messianism. And also, there was now the new state of Israel. And many of their co-religious have been there since the 1880s. So thousands took the trek through the desert to Aden. It was a treacherous journey with a great deal of disease, robbery, malnutrition, and unfortunately, death. the survivors made it to Hashid camp outside Yemen, which was overseen and who brought order to the camp by Max Lapidus from the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. Here, they would exchange their tattered rags for new clothes, and they would get vaccinations before they can go on to Israel. Here you see the Jews boarding a flight to Israel, which took place between June 1949 and September 1950. This was named Operation on Wings of Eagles from Exodus 19 and Isaiah 40. It was also nicknamed Operation Magic Carpet. There were 430 flights by then an obscure charter company, Near East Air Transport. Today we know it as Alaska Air. Very few possessions the Jews had, but they did take their Torah scrolls, if they could, with them. Here on the right, you see one of the flights. They can pack a lot of Yemenite Jews into a plane because the average weight of a Yemenite was only 80 pounds. Here on the left, you see a map of Iraq, and Jews lived in many towns and villages along the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. However, the most Jews were in the capital city of Baghdad, which was 35 to 40% Jewish. This was one of the most Jewish cities in the world diaspora, along with New York City and Warsaw. The Jewish quarter on the map of Baghdad was right in the center of the picture. Faisal was king of Iraq from 1922 when they gained independence from the British until 1933 when he died. He was generally pro-Jewish. And thanks to the Alliance Israelite Universal schools, which henceforth I will call the AIU schools, for boys and girls from 1864, the Jews had a head start in the economy with Western languages, math, sciences, and apprenticeships. The AIU was a French Jewish organization dedicated to bringing modernity to, in quote, backward Jews. The Jews became merchants. They were involved in commerce and in government. In fact, they were the wealthiest Jews in the Arab countries. And here you see a girls' school and a boys' school from the AIU. And you can see the changing fashions as Jews were becoming more modern. The Jews had Arab Jewish newspapers, Jewish orchestras, and Jews in Iraq were very important in Arab literary and musical culture. They had multiple institutions. Here is the Meir Ellis Hospital in Baghdad, and even a Jewish Boy Scout troop. However, in the late 1930s, things began to change for the worse. The Nazis started sending shortwave radio broadcasts with a great deal of anti-Semitism into Iraq. Mein Kampf was serialized in Arabic. The Mufti of Jerusalem had escaped from Palestine in the late 1930s and ended up in Baghdad. There was also increased Iraqi Arab nationalism and worsening economic conditions for Jews In fact, they needed to have Muslim partners to survive. During World War II, there was a pro-Axis coup in Iraq in April 1941, and Rashid Ali came into power. The British took troops from Palestine and Jordan and defeated the Iraqis on the way to Baghdad. They were poised on the outskirts of Baghdad when there was a great deal of incitement against the Jews at the end of May 1941. This culminated in the first 3 days of June with vicious riots in the Jewish quarter of Baghdad. The British did nothing. They did not want to interfere because they did not want to show favoritism toward the Jews. And here you see the mass grave of what's called the Farhud, or violent disposition. 130 Jews were killed in Baghdad. Almost 1,000 homes were looted. During the Israeli War of Independence, Iraqi troops were sent to Palestine. There were fines for Zionism. Jews were dismissed from the government. There were quotas in the university. They were unable to leave cities. They had a loss of trade licenses while martial law was declared. Here you see the trial and execution of Shafiq Adas in September 1948. He was from Basra and reported to be the wealthiest Jew in Iraq. And this execution shook the Jews terribly. After the end of martial law in December 1949, many Jews decided to take into their own hands and try to leave Iraq, taking their wealth with them. Many went to Iran and then were flown from Iran to Israel. And here you see one person's actual map of how to get across the border. These were greatly helped by Israeli emissaries led by, in the center, Mordechai Ben Parat, and helped by courageous Iraqi Zionist radio operators. The government decided in March 1950 that in order to keep the wealth in the country, they would give the Jews 1 year to leave Iraq and forfeit their citizenship. They thought only approximately 10,000 would leave. However, over 120,000 registered to leave, and this was done throughout their synagogues. On the lower left, you see what's called a laissez-passer, and it has a no return stamp on it. Here you see Iraqi Jews on a plane to Israel, and this was called Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, also taken care of by the Near East Air Transport, now connected with El Al. This took place in May 1950 to January 1952. The majority left in 1951, and just to speed things up, the Iraqis actually allowed direct flights to Israel from February 1951. But in March 1951, the Iraqis had a surprise for Jews. A new law deprived all stateless Iraqi Jews of their property. This made them instant paupers. What did they leave behind? They left behind the old shrines, such as the shrine of Ezra here in southern Iraq, their properties here, a Coca-Cola factory, and their ancient synagogues. Next, we turn to Libya, where 30,000 Jews lived in 1948. Most of the Jews were in the northwest, near the capital city of Tripoli, which you see here in the center. In fact, the city was approximately 25% Jewish, and many lived in the Jewish quarter, which you see here on the right. About 3,000 Jews lived in the northeast coast, particularly in Benghazi, and a few were even cave dwellers deep in the Sahara. Most Jews were artisans, and especially after the Italian takeover in 1911, Jews began to modernize, as you see with the traditional and modern clothes in the center, and Jewish women at the beach here in Tripoli. Many were able to move to the new European districts, but they were a cohesive group, and even those in the new quarter would come to the great synagogue in Tripoli in the old Jewish quarter to worship on Shabbat. Here you see Mussolini greeting the chief rabbi of Libya in 1937. However, in 1938, they parroted the racial laws that you saw in Germany at the time, but these were not fully implemented into 1941. During World War II, there was fighting back and forth in the east of Libya near Benghazi. However, the Germans occupied Benghazi in February 1941, and because they had previously welcomed the British Army, 2,000 Jews were deported to Sahara camps, where in terrible conditions, approximately 600 died. Here you see young girls welcoming the soldiers of the Palestinian Jewish Brigade in November 1942. They were part of the British 8th Army under General Montgomery. These Jewish soldiers made a profound impression on the Libyan Jews. And here you see a soldier from the Jewish Brigade teaching Hebrew. And there was a priest in Zionism in Libya, disappointed by their plight, was not helped by the Europeans. Even some Jews had been deported to Bergen-Belsen in Germany, and they returned at the end of the year. However, things turned for the worse, starting in November 5th to 7th, which was the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration in 1945. In Tripoli and close by, 130 Jews were killed, 5 synagogues were destroyed. And in Iraq, the British were slow to stopping the pogrom. Starting in January 1952, Libya was to become an independent country under King Idris. However, in 1951, the future prime minister said that Jews have no future in Libya. The Jews agreed, and 94% would go to Israel. And you can see the Hebrew writings on the ship. Below is the masthead of the last Jewish newspaper in 1951. It says, "Atuti gli Ibre de Libya, baracha v'shalom." To all the Jews of Libya, blessings and peace.